If you're trying to promote something online, one of the first thoughts you may have is, well, I have to have a website, right? Well, that's not true in podcasting. You can have a podcast without having a website that goes alongside of it. If you have a business website, I do recommend incorporating your podcast into your website. The first thing you should do is add in your main navigation, so that is the main bar at the top of your page, add the word podcast. And from there, you're gonna have it link to your episodes. My recommendation is that your site, especially those of you that are using a WordPress website where it's really easy to create additional pages and posts, I recommend that each episode has its own page. Why is that important? It's important for SEO value. People are searching for websites that have certain keywords, and we want to make sure that your website pops up and that specific page pops up when people are searching for content that belongs in one of your episodes. We want them to be sent straight to your episode page. Now, I know this sounds a little bit complicated, especially if you're not used to working with websites, but if you have a website designer, it's really easy for them to add a separate link to your main navigation, and via RSS feed, there's actual plugins, if you use WordPress, where it will automatically create a new post each time a new episode is created. So you can set this up so it's manageable, and it can be really helpful to get that SEO value in there. But for most people, if it's not connected to your business, do not focus on having a podcast website. There are bigger fish to fry. And I realize there are whole businesses out there that are focused on just creating podcast websites. It's always something you can go back to later down the road, but you've got enough to focus on right now. And again, audiences are consuming your content through apps. There's really no need to create a website, at least not at this point. So that's websites. Now let's talk about social media, and the same concept pretty much applies. If you already have a business that has social media, then simply promote your podcast on those social media sites. There's no sense opening up a brand new Facebook page or Instagram page just for your podcast. You're kind of starting over from scratch. And in theory, the same people that would subscribe or follow you on your company's social media site would also be interested in your podcast content. So simply include that so your entire audience can benefit. Which social media sites should you promote your podcast on? Wow, that is kind of a loaded question because it really depends on your content. There are different demographics for each social media site out there, and I'll go ahead and give you a breakdown of that. But you need to know, this goes back to your audience avatar, you have to know who your audience is so you know how to reach out to that type of person. How do you reach out to that type of demographic? Here's another tidbit. If you are using social media as a promotional tool and you're not just combining it with what you're already doing for your business, if you're planning to just create a social media channel just for your podcast, just focus on one. I want you to just laser focus in on managing one social media channel. Don't feel like because your demographic is on 5 different channels out there that you have to be everywhere. Because here's what's going to happen. You are going to get burnout. And none of the channels are going to get the attention they deserve in order to have some real conversion. And I don't want you guys to be upset if you start posting to social media and you don't see a huge change in your audience growth. Because the truth is, while social media is probably the strongest platform to promote our podcast, people are usually in a different frame of mind when they're on social media. You know, they're scrolling through and they're looking at cat memes and whatever. They're not necessarily thinking, oh, I'm going to stop whatever I'm doing and listen to a 30-minute podcast. So what we need to do is grab them pretty quickly and encourage them to subscribe to the show for later. And a great way to do that is something called audiograms. Audiograms are the ability to grab a soundbite, basically, from your podcast, from one of your episodes, Put an image behind it and a little bit of text, perhaps the name of the episode. It's a short clip. It's usually 60 seconds or less. And then it's in the format of something you would post to social media. So it's the right size and everything. And then you can post that little bit. So it's kind of like a little video that you create to these different social media sites.
On the track, all the other athletes are there. The crowd is there. What is going through your mind?
It was quite surreal, really. Because before Rio, I hadn't really run a major championships. Like the highest level I'd managed to run at was a European Under-23 championship. So,
on this week's podcast, I'll be exploring the connection between diet and brain health with my guest, Dr. Annie Fenn. Annie.
Creating audiograms is kind of the best of both worlds. You're promoting your podcast on social media where everyone is, but you're presenting it in a format that they can easily digest. Because again, they're not in the mood necessarily to listen to a 30-minute or 60-minute podcast, but they can click the play button, especially if you got some compelling images there. They can click the play button and listen to a great soundbite from the show. I would make sure if you start using audiograms, give them a very simple explanation of how they can subscribe to your show. I usually don't push subscriptions as being super duper important, but when you're reaching out on social media, again, it's too much for them to go back at a later date. They need to be reminded of your podcast. So when you write your description, always encourage them and provide some simple instructions on how they can subscribe to your show. That's the best way to use social media. So quick recap. For websites, if you don't already have a site, do not worry about it now. Let the fabulous podcast apps do what they were created to do. If you have a business site, make sure you add podcasts to your main navigation. And if possible, under that navigation, make sure each episode has its own page or own post so that you can get the SEO value out of that. When it comes to social media, if you have your own business, start promoting your podcast on the channels you've already created for your business. Don't reinvent the wheel there. Don't try to create a separate social media site just for your podcast. But if you don't have that and you're kind of starting this from scratch, then yes, I do recommend focusing on one social media channel, just one. And then once you master that channel, you can certainly add more channels to the mix. But I want you just laser focused on one channel. And again, for posting and promoting your podcast on social, I think audiograms are the best way to do that. If you just create a little bit of information and a cute little picture, you're gonna get likes, you're gonna get people sharing your message, but rarely does that convert to listener downloads or people listening to your episode. And that's really what you want. So those are some strategies for reaching out through websites and social media. Happy posting, guys.